Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar from KemSec, where we will talk about the tools that we offer to help companies and support others to get rid of PFAS. Welcome, and we will start with the agenda of this webinar. We will start with giving you a brief introduction to KemSec and our organization. After that, we will go through the ChemSec tools, where I will present together with my colleague, Dr. Anna Lengquist. So we will go through the SIN list, ChemSec Marketplace, and also the PFAS guide to give you all the different tools we have in order to phase out PFAS chemicals. After that, we will have plenty of time for a Q&A. And please use the Q&A function to post your questions, so in order for us to be able to answer them at the end of the webinar. So please use the Q&A. And as a reminder, recording of this webinar, as well as the slides, will be distributed to all the registrants of this webinar. So you will get the material and also recording after this webinar. And with that, I will start with giving you a very brief introduction to ChemSec and our work. So for those of you who do not know about ChemSec, we are a Swedish NGO. We work on chemicals, and our vision is to reduce the use of hazardous chemicals. We do that in a few different ways. So we drive the political discussion on hazardous chemicals by being a stakeholder at the different ECHA committees. We have great collaborations with the EU Commission, the EU Parliament, and other relevant EU institutions. Most of our policy work is focused on EU and the REACH legislation, the European chemicals legislation. But what we want to bring when we talk to policymakers is positive examples from the business world. And we do that by challenging companies to improve their chemicals management, to get these positive examples to show that there are companies doing great things that have progressive chemicals management. And to support these companies in order to make it easier and to facilitate for them to phase out hazardous chemicals and move to safer chemicals, we have developed a set of online tools, which we will talk about today. And apart from this work, we also do work where we work together with investors to inform them about the risks and opportunities within the chemical industry and the production of chemicals. So I just want to mention some of the company collaborations we do in order to get the insights regarding chemicals management from companies. So we have the ChemSec Business Group, which is a group of companies that we formed in order to be able to discuss chemicals legislation and the impact that chemical legislation has on companies, and also the barriers for these companies in order to be progressive. I also want to mention the PFAS movement. The PFAS movement consists of, I think it's around 110 companies today that are phasing out. They have committed to phase out PFAS from their products and their processes. And they are also supporting a ban on PFAS as a group of chemicals, as well as, of course, acknowledging that PFAS is a human health and environmental issue that needs to be taken care of. As I mentioned before, we also support an investor initiative on hazardous chemicals. And this initiative today consists of over 50 investors with 10 trillion or more than $10 trillion assets under management or assets under advice. And the three key asks that these investors have when they talk to their companies and engage with the chemical producers is to increase transparency. It's to phase out persistent chemicals like PFAS, and it is to develop safer alternatives. But today, we will talk about the different tools that we have. And I just wanted to briefly mention the sort of aim we have with the different tools. First of all, of course, as think all of you know, we want to support companies to perform substitution to phase out hazardous chemicals. That's the main objective we have with these tools. And we want, in order for companies to use our tools and to get the credibility, we want the tools to be relevant and ahead of regulation, because we know that that's important for companies. And basically, we want them to provide insights to future-proof the different businesses, because it is very expensive. And if a company has to phase out a chemical during a very, very short time frame. So therefore, we want to be able to show which chemicals will be regulated, how to prioritize, and how to start a phase out without being pushed directly by regulation. All of our tools, including the different company collaborations like the ChemSec business group that we do, is free. We don't get or take any money from the companies that we cooperate with. And I also want to say that the tools that we have, they provide foundation for investors and for the policy work. So that it is the tools give us the opportunity and the insights from the users and the companies that we can use for our investor and policy work. But with that, I will hand over to my colleague, Anna Lennqvist, who will start giving us a brief description on the SYN list. Please, Anna.
Thank you very much, Jonatan. So I will start to talk about the SYN list, and this is our first and oldest and probably most well-known tool. And as you might know, this is not only about PFAS, even if this is the topic of today, but we also have a PFAS angle to this tool as to the two other tools we will be talking about today. So SYN is an abbreviation. It stands for Substitute It Now. And the idea is that if you use the SYN list, if you keep track of the chemicals on your SYN list and you start substituting them now, you will be able to also stay ahead of regulation and avoid surprises when it comes to chemical regulation. This is the aim, and this is what we try to do to the best of our knowledge, so to say. And now we can take the next one. So the SYN list, we started to the idea about the SYN list at the same time as the REACH regulation was introduced into the European Union. And this was 2006. And at this time, the concept of having so-called substances of very high concern identified for a candidate list to later be banned unless exempted for specific uses was introduced along with the REACH regulation. But the process to list substances of very high concern on the candidate list is a political process where substances are brought up one by one, discussed and agreed by all member states. So it's a slow and also a bit unpredictable process. And the companies we were in dialogue with then, in part the same as now, but also other asked us what substances we thought would be on the REACH candidate list so that they could start substituting them now. So we started to do the exercise of populating a list with substances fulfilling the criteria that are laid out in REACH in detail, and providing at one row a list of substances that companies could focus on to be ahead of regulation. And we can take the next one. So since 2008 and the first update, we have done a number of both smaller and bigger updates on the SYN list, and these are the bigger ones. And the reasons that we have updated the SYN list over time is both because science has developed, we have learned more about specific substances, but we have also learned more about specific endpoints. And also the political environment has developed so that new types of endpoints or chemicals have been up for discussion and brought up. So we have tried to predict this. This is the aim of the SYN list, try to predict and to follow what's happening and to be a bit ahead of this so that companies also can follow the SYN list and be a bit ahead. So in 2011, we did a first main update with so-called endocrine disrupting chemicals that interfere with our hormones. And at this time, there was a big discussion about endocrine disrupting chemicals or EDCs, but there were not yet any regulatory criteria for what those substances are. So what we did was that we hired scientists, world-leading experts in the field of endocrine disruption, to evaluate a number of chemicals that were suspected to be EDCs, provide all the background information, and then we could list the number of chemicals on the SYN list and feel confident that for these ones, we have a lot of evidence. We have scientists saying that these are EDCs. And this was sort of the first concrete list of EDCs. And this was really something that many found useful because until then, the concept of endocrine disruption had been sort of very fluffy, and now it got concrete down to concrete chemicals. And along that idea, we have done a number of updates since. In 2014, we added more EDCs, but also persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic chemicals. And the theme for that update was regrettable substitution. So we added a number of substances that have been used to replace well-known toxic chemicals, but have later turned out to be equally hazardous because they are very similar in structure. So we added, for example, bisphenol S and bisphenol F that has been used as substitutes for bisphenol A, which we had added already in 2008. In 2019, we had followed the discussion and discovered that a new type of endpoint was being discussed and brought up as very crucial. And this is substances that are persistent, mobile, and toxic, which means that they are very water soluble and are transported through vast areas in water. And they were recognized as a big problem, and that's something that could be identified as substances of very high concern. So we added a number of PMTs or VPVMs along with additional PBTs and also along with the first nanomaterial. It's still the only nanomaterial on the SYN list, carbon nanotubes. And since then, PMTs and VPVMs have also been recognized as SVHCs and also been brought up as a known hazard class under the CLP regulation, the regulation for classification and labeling. And the most recent update we did this spring, where we added a number of PFAS chemicals to the SYN list. We already had a few since before, but we added them more systematically and as a bigger group. And I will describe more how we did that. So we can go to the next one. So as you are probably aware, PFAS is a very large group of chemicals. And how many chemicals there are different figures mentioned. For example, in the REACH restriction proposal now, the number 10,000 substances has been mentioned. At the same time, there has not been a list provided with those 10,000 substances, but has been an estimate of the number. And at ChemSec, we see that PFAS is really a big problem, and we consider all PFAS chemicals very, very problematic. So none of them are safe. But at the same time, we couldn't really add several millions of PFAS to the SYN list because it would flood it completely and it wouldn't be very practical. So we tried to figure out a way to do this, and we therefore defined all PFAS substances that have been registered for being used or imported into the EU or the US. And that quite drastically limited the number. So we have now 416 PFAS on the SYN list. Some of them we had before, but 370 new ones. And the idea with this is that while we think that all companies really need to identify and substitute all PFAS chemicals, if you need to find out what exact PFAS that are most likely to be found on the market, these ones should be the ones because they have been registered. So it's a way to find out how to focus on which PFAS substances. So we can take the next one. When we look at the people using the SYN list, it has been a constantly growing figure over the years since the start. Recent years, we've had around 40,000 visitors to the SYN list webpage each year. A couple of years ago, we also introduced a login. It's still free of charge, but if you create an account, you can use all of the SYN list and explore the database to the fullest. And we have more than 9,000 people that have registered an account in order to do this. When we look at the visitors and where they come from, they really come from all over the world. So it's not really a EU focus, even if it's very tightly connected to the REACH regulation. And this probably reflects that the supply chain is very global. So the largest or the most users have actually since the start almost come from the USA. But then we have a few EU countries, but we also have users from China, India, and other countries. And we see also that we have, I forgot that we really find all types of companies among the users. So both chemical producers, chemical users, brands, and also consultants. We also find governments, regulators, academia, financial investors, as Jonatan mentioned, and also a number of standards and eco-labels that use the SYN list also as part of their criteria. We can take the next one. So I just wanted to go very briefly through what it looks like when you come to the SYN list. And this is how it looks like when you type in synlist.org in your browser. And you see here that I have a login account, so I can explore the database, and you can also create this, of course. And you could choose if you want to type in a CAS number or a chemical name and search that, or if you just want to sort of explore the full database. Next one. And if you go to the menu up to the right, you can find a lot of different things to read to understand better how we did the SYN list, the science behind, frequently asked questions, the different updates, and so forth. So you find all the information there. We can take the next one. We have explained how the SYN list was set up, how it can be used, and also the science behind and the methodology when we have added substances at the different updates. Can take the next one. And the next one again. And when you come into the database, it can be a little bit overwhelming because we have over 1,400 substances on the SYN list. And it might be useful to have a look at all of them, but you might also want to narrow down the search and the focus in some way where to start. And therefore, we have a number of different filters. So you can select a subset of the SYN list to focus on, and you can do this based on health and environmental concerns, like, for example, endocrine disrupting chemicals or persistent chemicals or something like that. But we have also added, when the information has been available, how the chemicals are used. So you can search for different types of uses of chemicals. You can, if you come from, for example, textile, you can select to look only at textile chemicals. And then we have also additional information like reach status. Is this on the candidate list already or not? Is it registered or not? And so forth. And we have also grouped the SYN list into a number of groups. And we see that group-wise regulation and group-wise handling of chemicals in different ways is really what is coming more and more. So it's very useful to also look at chemicals group-wise, and the SYN list helps you do that. And then we have the producers added because this is of interest to the investment community. You can also download the full list in Excel by using those buttons there. And you can also find links to alternatives on Marketplace, which Jonatan will talk more about. And the final one here, the next slide, is also to show you that you can select then the PFAS, which is the topic of today. So you can have a look at only the PFAS chemicals that have been added to the SYN list. And by that, I hand over to Jonatan to talk about the Marketplace.
Thank you very much, Anna. So I will talk about the other coin regarding chemical substitution. So the SYN list, talking about what we should not use. And at the ChemSec Marketplace, we want to show what is possible and what you should use instead. So the ChemSec Marketplace is a business-to-business platform where we want to connect providers of safer alternatives with potential buyers. So you can see the first page on this slide. But briefly, I just want to talk about the aim of Marketplace. So the aim of Marketplace is several. So we want to increase the visibility of alternatives to hazardous chemicals because we know that sometimes it's difficult for alternatives to be visible. So we want to provide a platform for that. But we also want to increase the availability of alternatives because we want to give opportunity to smaller companies and to bigger companies to showcase their alternatives and to show that there are safe alternatives for many different uses and for many different sectors. In addition to that, we want to highlight areas and sectors where alternatives are available, because we know it's important to show that for this use or for this function, we have a range of different alternatives, which also means that we can have regulation regarding that use. But equally important, we also want to show or we want to identify the uses and functions where alternatives are not available, because that's where we need R&D, that's where we need to focus attention, and we need to focus the research in order to find those alternatives. And in the end, of course, we want to support policymakers to take informed decisions regarding alternatives and chemicals, which one we can phase out, which functions we can stop using hazardous chemicals for. So that is the aims we have with the marketplace. And as I said, what we want to achieve is substitution. And with the part that we want to take in this, I would say, a rather large work regarding substitution. And we want to facilitate and to help and support in the first part where the companies can find available alternatives and viable alternatives. So we want to provide the contact between suppliers or solution providers that have safe alternatives for a specific use that is interesting for a buyer that are looking for safe alternatives, are looking to phase out hazardous chemicals. So that's the space where ChemSec Marketplace want to help, to support and to facilitate. Of course, we know that substitution work is a very long process and it takes a lot of time and it's a lot of effort. But so we want to support in the specific part, the initial finding and the initial identification of alternatives that might be interesting for specific use. But of course, we want to also talk about what is then a safer alternative. And for that, we have set this a set of criteria. So no substances on the REACH candidate list, no substances on SIN list, no CMRs, no PBTs, VPVBs, or PMT, VPVM, and no EDCs. So basically, one can say that this is sort of the SVHC criteria, which we have expanded slightly to encompass a slightly larger set of endpoints in order for us to ensure that the alternatives that are on marketplace, that can be found on marketplace, are safer. And I should also add that we cannot always, as ChemSec, not always get the information regarding the safety of different on the products, but the responsibility to show that the products or the alternative are fulfilling our criteria is on the provider of the solution. So the solution provider, the companies that have the ad on marketplace, need to show to us that they are fulfilling the criteria, or say to us that they are fulfilling the criteria for marketplace. But moving from what is not an alternative to what is an alternative, so marketplace welcomes all kinds of different alternatives. And the sort of classical alternative that is most what you think about when you talk about doing chemical substitution is, of course, to remove the hazardous chemical and add a drop-in substitute in the same process, in the same condition. Usually that's not the case. Of course, there are examples of where you can do that without making any change. But if you do a drop-in substitute, you probably have to do a lot of other work regarding the process. But one part of the alternative space is, of course, the drop-in substitute. But I would say that it's equally important to talk about other types of changes, other types of alternatives, like different technological solutions that also provide the opportunity to not use a hazardous chemical, to change to a new process that excludes the use of hazardous chemicals, or the use of new material that also makes it possible to exclude the use of hazardous chemicals. So therefore, it's always important when we talk about alternatives and assessments, and when you want to substitute hazardous chemicals, that the important thing is to identify the functionality you want to substitute, because that means that you can use other things than chemicals to substitute these the hazardous chemical. So then zooming in on the marketplace, and what can be found on the web page, on the alternatives web page. If you find a specific alternative, if you search for something and you find a range of alternatives and you click one of them, you will find a description of function and use for that specific alternative, usually a fairly short one, in order for you to get an overview of what kind of alternative it is. you will get information on what that alternative can replace, which hazardous chemical it can substitute. You will also get information regarding if there are any third-party verification or standards that this alternative fulfill. And you will get the opportunity to contact suppliers directly on the webpage through a contact form in order to easily do the contact and to facilitate the initiation of a substitution. Looking at who is using Marketplace, we have today almost 700 different alternatives in many different uses, functions, and sectors. During this year, we've had 50,000 visitors. Again, regarding Marketplace, actually very non-EU centric crowd, at least for the most common countries, US, China, India, UK is top 5, but Germany is also there. So quite a few countries not non-EU. We have around 8,000 page views on ads per month. So quite a lot of ads being viewed. And we see that around 2 contacts are made per day from someone who is interested in finding out more information on a specific alternative. So what, of course, is interesting for us to see which are the most popular alternatives, what are companies working with, where are they looking for alternatives. And for a long time, I would say quite a few years, the DWR alternatives, that's the durable water repellency, providing water repellency for textiles and other surfaces, has been very popular. Of course, this is PFAS related. So PFAS, which we're talking about during this webinar, is widely used as a durable water repellency, and the PFAS alternatives for that specific use are actually quite a lot, especially on Marketplace, where you can find the different alternatives. So in general, textile solutions are very popular. Dyes finishing, just 2 examples of the different uses and different alternatives, but also leather related alternatives are popular. And we also have a section looking at bio-based solutions, because as I think all of you know, we need to bio-based is one way of solving the climate crisis. So we think that it's important for us to highlight these solutions, and many of them are fairly popular as well. But this webinar is about PFAS. So if we look at specifically on the connection Marketplace and PFAS, we have a special section for the alternatives to PFAS, which you can find on the webpage, the icon that I have indicated here. There are around 100 alternatives to PFAS today. During 2024, we will continue to have a focus on PFAS. So there will probably be more alternatives coming into Marketplace for the many different uses of and functions of PFAS that there are. And of course, PFAS is a very important focus. I mean, we have a health and environmental crisis, and there is a lot of legislative pressure around PFAS. So it is important also for us to identify and find the different alternatives. So what kind of alternatives do we have today? In general, there are 3 different major uses of PFAS that we can provide alternatives to for on Marketplace, but there are also other alternatives. We are not limited to these categories. So the 3 big ones are the durable water repellency, which I already mentioned, but also firefighting foams, which also are under legislative pressure, and food contact material, where we have seen member states having specific legislation on PFAS in food contact materials. So it's not surprising that these 3 categories are the ones where we have most alternatives. But of course, as I said before, more alternatives are welcome. So you're very welcome and contacting us if you have new alternatives. So that was the Marketplace part, and I will now continue with the last tool that we're talking about today, the PFAS guide, which helps companies understand if, where, and why you have PFAS. And that is, I would say, a very big challenge to many companies to understand this, because PFAS is used in such a wide variety of different uses. So it's difficult to get an overview of what the impact is on your organization. So basically what we want to achieve, the aim with the PFAS guide is to support companies in understanding this, if, where, and why they have PFAS, because it is a great challenge. And that's the important step you need to take in order to facilitate the following PFAS phase out, because it's very difficult to work with substitution if you don't know where PFAS are used and where what you need to substitute, what kind of functionality you need to substitute. So PFAS guide is basically two parts. So the first part I will describe here is the information part. Sorry. And the information part have some different sections. So in the investigate part, we will talk about typical PFAS uses, what we call red flags, but also on communication, especially for the supply chain. What questions can you ask? How should you ask the questions? How can you define what is a PFAS? How can you work with other types of communication around PFAS? And you also want to verify the different answers you get, then you want to verify the existence or non-existence of PFAS in your product. So there is also one section regarding chemical analysis and testing of PFAS. There is a wide range of different testing methods that can give you different questions or different answers. So we have a section describing the different techniques, the different methodologies, in order to support companies to understand how they can verify if there is PFAS or not in the products. So the second part is talking about phase out. As you know, substitution is a way to phase out chemicals. But again, we need to understand what the functionality is. It is not, as I said before, always straightforward, replacing one chemical with another. You can do that in many different ways. And understanding functionality gives you a wider variety of different ways to solve that issue. So, as I said before, you can change materials in new technologies, or even change your production process to facilitate a move away from hazardous chemicals. And also, there is a brief section regarding how to compare alternatives and assess alternatives. The third part is about the concern. Why do we have a concern with PFAS? As you all know, PFAS is a great threat to the human health. We have a lot of environmental problems with PFAS, and they are still being used on a broad scale, despite all of this scientific findings with the problems with PFAS. And the biggest concern with PFAS is, of course, that they are persistent, which means that they do not degrade in nature, and they will remain there. Sorry. For a very long time, which means that over time we will have increasing concentrations leading to other types of effects, both for humans and the environment. And we already today have, almost all of us has PFAS in the blood, and we find PFAS from the Arctic pole to Mount Everest. So we really have a crisis that we need to tackle. And one way of tackling this is through regulation. And I would say that in order to make sure that the whole market is moving, you need regulation to push that. There is also a lot of different initiatives regarding regulation, not only in the EU, where we have several different restrictions, like the broad PFAS restriction. In the US, we have over 30 states with very different regulations, some targeting specific uses, some having requirements of reporting. So there is a very fractured landscape of regulation regarding PFAS. So it's important for companies to keep track of that. And this is one way of trying to do that. And we want to support companies in that work. And of course, a fractured landscape is much more difficult to work with for companies. So it's also important that we get a bigger PFAS regulation in order to have the predictability for companies to know what kind of legislation is upcoming and how they can deal with that. And this last part is the sector part, where we are trying to gathering links to sector-specific reports, for example, electronics or food contact materials. So if you want more information and more details, you can find that in that section. The other part of PFAS guide is the database part, when you can find information regarding PFAS uses and functions. And what we've done is to incorporate information from scientific publications, scientific reports and other reports, but also information from individual companies that we have gathered through interviews and other ways. In addition to that, we have added links to the SIN list if there is a link to a specific CAS number. We have added links to alternatives on marketplace in order to easily find what you can replace this use with or this chemical with. We have also added links to reports on alternatives in order to find more information regarding how to replace PFAS. This is a living document. We want it to be a growing source of information. We're adding information as we go on. So we would love if you have information to please contact us and make sure that we get that information. You have the email address here where you can contact us. If you want to search for a specific use or function or sector, you can do that through a directed search where you can check or identify your sector or your use that you want to understand more about, where you can find potential PFAS uses and functions in the relevant sector and products for you. And we also include, as I said before, information on related CAS numbers and alternatives for that specific search result. We have also done a report looking specifically on PFAS in electronics because we believe that this is one of the most important sectors. The research and the work was done through desktop research, but also through interviewing a range of different experts to understand and get a good picture of the PFAS use in electronics. We divided the PFAS or the electronics sector into 3 different parts: the electronic devices, the manufacturing process of electronics, and the semiconductor and related processes. We have identified 77 uses, functions, and potential alternatives for those. It is used by companies today. For example, HP is using it in the supply chain communication, and it's a hands-on guide for companies to what they can do if you're working with electronics. What can a company do hands-on? Where can you start? What kind of uses and functions should you look specifically on? You can download the report as a PDF, but you can also get the Excel sheet with the specific information if you're only looking for the different uses and alternatives and the CAS numbers connected to that. And of course, all of that information gathered in this Check Your Tech report is also included in the PFAS guide database. The PFAS guide users, it was launched end of February this year. We have had 23,000 users during 2023. And again, we've looked at the most common countries or the users from the countries, and this is actually very EU-centric, except for USA. So Germany, US, and Sweden, the 3 top countries. And I want to reiterate that this is a living database. We need more information, so please contact us if you have that information and want to add uses and functions or alternatives or other PFAS-related information. So that was all of the tools that we wanted to talk about. So I'll just very briefly summarize the PFAS guide: if, where, and why you have PFAS in your products. The SIN list, the PFAS chemicals most likely found in products. And marketplace, where you can find the safe alternatives to actually do the substitution and move away from PFAS. And with that, we will go over to the Q&A. So please, Anna, if you have some questions, yes, we can try to answer.
Thank you, Jonatan, for going through those 2 tools. So we have got a number of questions here, and you can still write in questions if you want, and we'll see what questions we can answer in the time we have left. But I can start from the top and answer the first one myself. There's a question why there are different numbers of known plus used PFAS between our list and the automotive industry. And my answer to that would be that I actually don't know how the automotive industry did their PFAS list. It has 1619 CAS numbers, it says here, and the SIN list, as I said, has 416. For the SIN list, we did, as I mentioned, we looked at the substances registered for production or import to the US or the EU, and we used the the OECD definition of PFAS, and brought out the PFAS from those lists. And as I mentioned, there are a number of different PFAS lists available and a number of different estimates of how many PFAS we are talking about. So there are many different lists, and you simply have to find out for the one that you use what is the basis for the selection of chemicals there. And I can move on. I can read the next one for you, Jonatan. So it's a question about a person that works in the live event sector and order much food and drinks, and has the problem that many products described as compostable actually contain PFAS, but that it's difficult to ask for information about this because since PFAS is not yet regulated. And do you have any recommendations how you can make your suppliers answer such a question when there is no regulation in place? Or what are your thoughts about that?
Again, I think that's a very good question. I think that this is something we see what we get from many different companies. If we look at this specific example regarding compostable, I think that this is a problem that we've seen. I know that there are some other NGOs that have looked specifically on food contact material that are said to be compostable, and that they in many cases contain PFAS because many of the compostable material need some kind of barrier to make sure that the food or the liquid doesn't leak through, and that's where the PFAS is usually used. So I definitely think that this is a problem, and I agree. I think that many suppliers of these mostly single-use containers don't know about PFAS, or as you said, wrote in the question, they are not regulated, so it is not seen as an issue. I think that how to communicate around that, I think it's important that we try to engage as many companies as possible. The more companies or organizations that ask these questions, that also push the suppliers. I think that we see a more more awareness regarding PFAS also within the different supply chains. I think that with time we will see more awareness about this, and we will see more alternatives. But I definitely think that if you have a stringent way of talking about PFAS, to define what is the PFAS, why, and also explain why you want to face not using it, it might help with your supply chain. But I think that the most important thing is that more companies are doing this and more companies are asking, because that will definitely push all the suppliers towards the other kind of solutions.
Thank you very much. I can answer a simple question on my own, and that is a question if there is a fee to using these different tools, and it's not. They are freely available. The only thing is if you want to use the Sinlist database that you have to create an account, but that is still free of charge. And related to that, there is a question, very nice question, how individuals can support our projects. And there is actually a donate button somewhere on the webpage, ChemSec webpage. Not very many people use it, but that's possible and much appreciated, of course. But otherwise, I would say that you would very much support us just by using the tools and by informing us if there is specific things you would like to see, or if there is a problem. And what is especially valuable, for example, for the marketplace, is that we would really like to have more alternative products in there. We would like to have more requests if you don't find an alternative that you are looking for. And also for the PFAS guide, we are very interested in more information about where PFAS is used, and we can put this information into the database. So everyone that is doing this work on their own in the company might have some additional information, and if you want to like to provide that to us, that would be highly appreciated, I could say. And I can move on to a question then to you, Jonatan. So concerning the alternatives on marketplace, how do you know that they are actually safer than PFAS, for example?
So this is the most important question, I think, and one of the most common question we get regarding what is actually a safer alternative and how to define that. As I mentioned during my presentation, we've set for marketplace alternatives, we've set a range of or a set of criteria. that the products advertised on marketplace need to fulfill. As I mentioned, I mean, for reasons like CBI or for IP reasons, we are not always able, or the companies are not always able to submit all that information to us in order for KemSec to sort of verify that. And in that case, we ask the companies to provide a written confirmation that yes, these products are fulfilling the criteria for that for a product on marketplace. So that's how we try to make sure that we find safer alternatives. Of course, this is also evolving. We have changed the criteria. Sometimes we add some other endpoints when we get more information. So this might also happen in the future, that we will change the criteria in order to incorporate new hazard endpoints, for example, because the main thing with marketplace is to provide safer alternatives, and we want to ensure that, and we do our best. But I should say that it's also difficult for us to have, as a small organization, to do a lot of assessments, and that's why we put the responsibility on the companies to show that they are fulfilling our criteria.
Thank you very much. There was one question about if PTFE Vuitton Calres used for gaskets and seals are on the SIN list, or if they are exempt. And I would say, as a general answer, we do not have polymers on the SIN list, and that is basically because they have not yet been registered under REACH and part of the authorization process. This is something that will most likely happen in the future. There is work ongoing on how to do that, but so far they have not been there, and therefore they are not on the SIN list, as we are relating so strongly to the authorization process. That said, we really see that fluoropolymers are problematic and are PFAS, as other PFASs, and are part of the PFAS group. We have written quite a lot about that on our webpage, why we see them as equally problematic. And we are also welcoming alternatives also to fluoropolymers on the marketplace, for example, and we have them in the PFAS guide. So I hope that answered your question, and there is much more to read on the webpage about that.
Maybe I can just add that for the PFAS guide, we have included the fluoropolymers within the PFAS family. So within PFAS guide, the uses and functions of PFAS, there is a lot of different uses of fluoropolymers for that, where we also talk for those instances where we have alternatives. We also mentioned those within the PFAS guide, because as Anna said, from ChemSec point of view, the fluoropolymers are equally concerning and really are part of the PFAS family. And as we see for the PFAS restriction work and other authority work within the EU, that also policymakers consider the fluoropolymers to be part of the PFAS family, so they will probably be regulated under the PFAS restriction.
Thank you very much. I saw there was also additional questions on fluoropolymers, but I think that we've answered them all now. A little bit related question is if companies should substitute PFAS also during production, or can they continue using PFAS in production? And I suppose that means as long as they are not in the final product, or do we have a view on that? Would you like to answer that, Jonatan?
Yes, I can try. So, I mean, PFAS, whether they are used in products or in processes or in production facilities producing products, it is, I mean, what we see is PFAS as a family of substances is very problematic. They have a lot of hazardous problems, and they are, as I mentioned during my talk, very, very persistent, all of them. So I would say that the use of, even though the consumer products is one phase where we definitely see that we need to phase out PFAS, but the industrial uses are equally important. Coming back again to fluoropolymers, which is one of the big family of our group of PFAS that's used within production, they are very problematic. We need to phase them out as well. There, of course, we also see that there are some uses today where it's difficult to replace them. That's why we have a PFAS restriction where we can get the derogation if there are no alternatives today, or if there is a low potential for substitution. But definitely we need to look at the whole use of PFAS, all use of PFAS, and we want to phase them out as soon as possible. And I also think that, again, looking at the dossier, the PFAS restriction work, that also the member states that done that work and the policymakers believe that the industrial uses should also be phased out.
Thank you. There is one question asking if the PFAS guide have a section with clear testing guidelines for PFAS in textiles. And I would say not really. We have relatively brief information about different types of testing. We know it's also, but there is information available from ECHA or in the registration or in the restriction proposal for PFAS. There is also an annex with the testing proposals. We also have some, as Jonatan said, there is a session where we link to different reports from different sectors. And I think there are some reports in there regarding the textile industry, where you can also find more information about that. And I can follow up on a question. No, I already forgot. I lost my thought. Maybe you have another question, Jonatan.
I can take one regarding the pharmaceutical use of PFAS, if there is any association that lists and track that. As far as I know, I haven't seen a complete list of the use of PFAS within pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals is one part that is excluded from the universal PFAS restriction. So there will be continued possibility to continue use PFAS. But I think that it's important to mention here that I mean, PFAS and PFAS sort of substructures is a very important part of or used a lot in pharmaceuticals. So I think it's an important sector to also look at and to make sure that the legislation within that sector is following up on the PFAS restriction in order to reduce the use of PFAS or PFAS structures within pharmaceuticals as well. But coming back to the actual question, I haven't seen a list of PFAS within pharmaceuticals. So sorry to say no on that one, but I think there might be one, and then it's a very important thing to look at, I think.
Thank you. And now I found the question I thought about. And it's a question if the tool, I'm not sure which of the tools, but we can talk for all of them, is suitable for industrial applications where multiple key functions are required simultaneously. And this links very nicely to PFAS. Then I assume that is also the case, because one thing that have made PFAS so very popular and so much used is that it provides a number of functions. So you can have both like thermal resistant, and it can also be flame retardant, and it can also be smooth, and it can provide a number of different functions. And this is also what makes substitution of PFAS sometimes challenging, because it can be difficult to find one substitute that has all of these properties. And this is also, I think, a main reason why it's important to look at substitution from a broader perspective. So in order to substitute, for example, PFAS, you might have to substitute it with several different chemicals, or you might find that another material or another technical solution or another process change or something can help you fulfill the requirements you're after. So it's important to consider what function is really key, or what functions are really key, and what can we perhaps live without, and to investigate different possibilities to solve that. So I can just give one example that, for example, if you have cables into a computer, and there has been a requirement for PFAS for flame retardants, but some companies have solved this by not putting close to each other, so it doesn't get so hot, so you do not need that type of flame retardants. So there can be many different solutions to one problem. And coming back to our tools, you can search for functions and uses both in Marketplace and the PFAS guide. I think it's difficult to, you can tick several of them at the same time and see what you find there.
Maybe I can answer one which I thought was a bit interesting. So how will you attract more companies and users of PFAS to substitute to something less toxic? I think this is the whole sort of idea with ChemSec, that we want to facilitate companies to actually do substitution. And I think regarding PFAS, or I would say in general, when we talk about hazardous chemicals, legislation is sort of the major driver for innovation and finding new alternatives and moving to safer alternatives. So that is, of course, one important way of changing the market to make sure that we use safer alternatives. But I also think that what we see now, when we see many companies speaking about phasing out PFAS, we see a lot of these health concerns and environmental concerns, and that companies are really understanding that we need to do something. We have a PFAS crisis. We need to do something. Whether we have legislation or not, we can still do something as a company. I think we see a lot of that. And with, for example, the PFAS movement, it shows that there are a lot of will also sort of from the non-legislative side. So I definitely think that we see a lot of movement around that, and we also see a political will to actually do something with PFAS. So I hope that, from ChemSec perspective, we will keep working with engaging companies and providing these tools to make it easier for them to substitute. And I think that's what we want to contribute to regarding how to phase out PFAS and to move away from these chemicals.
Thank you. I can read out a question, and maybe this will be the last one. We'll see if there is time left. So the question is ChemSec also engaged in forums where there is a discussion about which uses are deemed societally relevant? For example, ski wax is fairly hard to replace, but this issue is deemed as less relevant, which I am sure some would disagree with. So I interpret this as a question a little bit related to the so-called essential use concept, which is something that has been discussed in the context of PFAS regulation, where scientists have proposed several years ago that as PFAS is so problematic, it should be allowed only where the use is considered essential. And this is also something that the Commission has said in the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability that they will look into. However, the discussion of what should be considered as an essential use has not been finalized, while the PFAS restriction proposal has been finalized. And so in the end, the essential use concept was not really part of the proposal. But what happened is that the PFAS restriction proposal instead builds on the availability of alternatives. So when there are alternatives, there is no derogation proposed. And ski wax is an example where there actually are functional and good alternatives. And this is also something where, at least in Sweden and I think other countries, also the Ski Association has done a voluntary measure to ban PFAS ski waxes ahead of regulation. I still think that this discussion on essential uses will continue. From ChemSec side, we have wanted this concept to be a little bit rephrased, because it's the question of what is essential is really something that everyone has a different view on. Personally, I think it makes it easier if you instead ask the question in when is it justified to use really hazardous chemicals, for example, PFAS. So what are the uses where the use of such a problematic type of chemical is justified for human health or for society and so forth. But this is an ongoing discussion where nothing is yet finalized.
Thank you. I think that we are running out of time. So I think that was actually the last question. So I would like to thank you, Anna, for providing very good answers and much insight on the SIN list. And I hope that this has given you an overview of the tools, and I hope that it will also encourage you to go to our website and try them out. So thank you for your attention, and I wish you a good rest of the Monday. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.